Hello and welcome to this presentation, I&E's presentation of testing SolarWinds Network Performance Monitor with GNS3. I'd like to take just a brief moment to talk a little bit about what this course is going to cover and what you can expect. Now before we go into the details of coverage here, a couple of quick things. There are a couple of course prerequisites for you to get the most out of watching this course. So I'm making some assumptions here. Number one, I'm assuming that you, the learner, have some familiarity with GNS3. In other words, you've already downloaded it on your laptop or something. You know how to put iOS images into it. You know how to create and drag and drop routers and switches and create your network topologies and do all your routing and switching and all of that stuff. So in order to really follow along with these videos and play with this that I'm going to talk about here, you do need that level of familiarity and comfort with GNS3. In addition to that, this series of videos is not really designed for someone who has never touched Network Performance Monitor before. There are a lot of things you have to know when you're downloading and installing the NPM software on your server. Certainly the downloading of the software is pretty easy, but once it gets into the installation of the software, there might be things that you need to know about SQL servers and other things to get the software fully up and functional. So Network Performance Monitor is actually part of the SolarWinds Orion suite of features. And when you install it, it actually installs dozens of different software features that all integrate and work with each other. And the Network Performance Monitor is sort of like the high-level thing that sort of ties them all together. So this particular series of videos is not going to cover all the details of the actual installation process of Network Performance Monitor from scratch. So I'm assuming that you already have done that, or if you haven't, go ahead and pause the video right now and go back to SolarWinds website and go through their other training manuals and stuff about how to do that, because I'm assuming at this point you've got some sort of server like Windows Server or something that's already up and operational. You've already downloaded NPM onto that, and you've got it working. So what this is really designed to do, this course, is how do we integrate the two together? You might have been used to playing with GNS3 just to create your own emulated topologies and learn about routing and switching and stuff, and then you may have learned about NPM and thought, hey, this would be kind of interesting, and then maybe you built a small little lab to test it with, maybe 2 or 3 routers and a couple switches connected physically to your server. And what I'm going to show you here in this series of videos is you can actually integrate the two. You can connect GNS3 to your Network Performance Monitor, and in that way you can create GNS3 topologies as large or as small as your hardware and memory will allow, and you can test out NPM. You can play with all the different features and the things that you can do in the privacy and safety of an emulated lab that was created by GNS3. And that's the real power behind what we're going to talk about here. You don't need to have access to a huge, large, enterprise-level lab in order to get familiar with NPM. You can start with just GNS3 and do it from there. So what are we going to talk about in this series of videos? Well, I'm going to start with 1 or 2 videos on an explanation of the topology that I'm going to use. So you're going to see my GNS3 topology, a physical topology, as well as the server that's hosting all of it, including NPM. I'm going to talk real quickly about some memory and software requirements. Not going to go into the gory details of this, but just enough to get you up and running so that if you're actually in the process of purchasing your own server or something, you don't make some key mistakes in getting a server that doesn't have enough memory or doesn't have CPUs that are powerful enough to do what we're going to show you right here. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Then we're going to get into associating GNS3 to NPM virtual machines. Now, why do I say virtual machine? If you're running Network Performance Monitor on a server and your intent is that server will discover a real live production network, well then NPM could certainly be running right on the host operating system of that Windows server or that Unix server or whatever it happens to be. But when you want NPM to discover and work with your emulated routers and switches that are in your GNS3 topology, GNS3 has a requirement that NPM has to be within a virtual machine. Now, in my particular examples, I'm going to be using VMware Workstation and talking about creating a virtual machine within that and installing NPM. But this is a requirement of GNS3. This is not a requirement of NPM by itself. But if you want NPM to talk to GNS3, GNS3 requires that NPM be separate in its own virtual machine. And so we're going to go into a lot of details about that, about assignment and configuration of IP addressing for the virtual machines, details of requirements for the virtual machines from like memory and CPU processing standpoint, and a whole bunch of other stuff. Then we're going to talk about getting started with NPM and some basic troubleshooting. In other words, once you've downloaded the software and it looks like it's ready to go, and I'm going to talk about, okay, well, there's like 24 pieces of software in there. Which one do you click on to actually bring up your web browser that shows you NPM? And secondarily, if you bring up your web browser by clicking on that icon and the Orion web console does not come up, NPM does not come up, what's some real basic high-level troubleshooting that we can do to sort of rule out some of the easy stuff? We'll talk about that. And then also, we'll talk about a new feature of NPM version 12, which is called NetPath services. And we're going to spend quite a bit of time going into the details of how NetPath works. So I'm going to talk about NPM discovery. In other words, how do you configure NPM to discover all of your GNS3 routers and switches, or if you're using other stuff within GNS3, because GNS3 can certainly support more than just Cisco devices as well. And NPM can dynamically learn of and monitor dozens and dozens of different vendors' devices. We'll talk about configuration details and troubleshooting. When it comes to NetPath, we'll talk about all kinds of things, starting a NetPath service. What's this thing called NetPath probes and how do they work? You'll even see some examples of me using Wireshark to do packet captures, so you can actually see the gory details of how does NetPath do what it does.